We begin the chapter with Chase choosing a spot off the trail, through an open tract of dead spruce trees, past the fallen remains of rotting monarchs with leaves and woods littering the forest floor as a result of previous storms, looking like a tangled sea of dead snakes. As they all travel through the forest, Zed, Richard, Kalen, and Chase are followed by a cloud of mosquitoes, vampiric and ravenous for a good meal, forcibly taken from the blood of the living to sustain themselves. Richard, Kalen, Zed, and Chase are traveling through the woods, surrounded by a dense fog, making it difficult to see them very well. I can't see my script very well. Or far. Yes, difficult. As they travel, Chase feels comfortable with the area and doesn't seem to be concerned, but Richard isn't taking anything on faith and is keeping a sharp lookout because with such limited visibility, it would be difficult to see danger before it was almost upon them. As they travel, Zed is content to eat a snack and see the sights around him, and Richard is glad to have Chase to lead them. Richard takes a moment to think about his time on Zed's Wizard Rock. The experience was so profound that even the next day, the change of perspective has Richard's mind still rearranging itself to make sense of everything he's seen. Richard recognizes his responsibilities as less of a burden and more of an opportunity. He still feels like he's in danger, but also feels more resolved to try and stop Dark and Raw, not only to help himself, but because if he doesn't, then a lot more people than him are going to pay the price. Richard takes a moment to think about Kalen and taking her to a place where they can live in peace, surrounded by the beauty of nature, a place where she doesn't have to worry about being attacked by enemies. And he questions if that is just an impossible fantasy. Chase, somehow knowing exactly where they're going in this dead and fog-riddled landscape, tells everyone that this is the spot he was looking for. Richard says, "Chase, all of this looks exactly the same." And Chase says, "Richard, my boy, step right up and behold the wonder of a genuine, electrified, bonafide, green-colored boundary wall." And Richard says, "Well, I don't see any boundary wall. Are you sure it's there?" Cue the lights, start the music, and like Gene Wilder, may the gods of comedy rest over his soul, Chase proceeds to tap dance into the boundary, revealing when a person gets too close to the boundary wall, they're first surrounded by a glowing green light that presses against them like a glowing green 10 by 10 sheet. Richard is able to see through the green glow, but it's like looking through wavy green glass. It's still possible to see, but everything looks distorted. Once Chase moves away from the boundary, the green sheet goes away like it was never there. Richard tells Chase he isn't impressed by his ability to summon a wavy, distorted wall of green light just by tap dancing into it, and Chase asks him what more was he expecting. Richard says he always thought the wall to the boundary was something he would be able to see, and that he's disappointed there isn't something more obvious for him to look at. Since Richard wasn't impressed by his summoning of the green glow from thin air, Richard pulls the old disappearing branch, reappearing shorter branch covered in dog slobber trick. Chase explains the heart hounds behind the boundary are responsible for destroying the branch. Chase realizes he's performing for a tough crowd, but is encouraged by Richard's amazement with his disappearing stick routine. Chase grabs Richard by the shirt and physically drags him towards the boundary to witness the grand finale. For his final illusion, Chase is about to make Richard's will to live completely disappear before his very eyes. Chase takes Richard's arm and leads him to the proper spot, telling him he needs to be very careful and trust him to decide when they are close enough. As Richard steps into the boundary, he is surrounded on all sides by a green glow. There's also a buzzing sound, which remains the same volume but gets deeper with every step he takes. The further he goes, the greener it gets, and the more insistent the noise becomes. Richard can no longer see the forest, the trees, Kalen, or Zed. Chase lines up on his proper mark and tells him not to move. Suddenly, the green sheen of wall, which has been following him forward, turns into a dark and transparent wall. Richard can see the dead trees beyond the wall and can make out dark forms and shapes beyond it. Richard realizes the buzzing noises were voices calling out to him. Richard feels alone, and the more he thinks about it, the worse it gets. The loneliness gives him pain, and Richard starts to think that the arms and the voices just beyond the boundary will make all of that pain and loneliness go away, promising to make him never feel alone again. If that wasn't bad enough, Richard sees his father calling out to him. Richard misses his father and can only think about how safe it would be if he went to him. Chase, having successfully succeeded at making Richard's will to live disappear, watching as he tries to step forward into the boundary, but not to be undone, he follows up with his grand finale with an even more impressive trick. He takes the thoughts directly from Richard's head and makes him forget who he is in a display of stagecraft that would put David Copperfield to shame. Richard recognizes that something is holding his arm. Something is stopping him from going to see his father. Richard struggles against it and tries even harder to break free. Richard screams at him, telling whoever was doing this to let him go. But his voice has no conviction behind it. Chase pulls Richard out of the boundary wall and the green glow around Richard vanishes. When Richard is dragged clear, Chase lets him go, and Richard immediately gains control of his sword hand back. Richard can hardly believe how easy it was for him to lose control of himself, and he realizes how close he came to the point of no return. He was unprepared for this type of challenge, but luckily for him, Chase was there to protect him from the thing that took him inside to go and see. Richard realizes he doesn't even know who he was just a few moments ago. Have you ever felt the need to apologize after a few words or phrases came out much harsher than intended? It's sort of the same thing. In the moment, rational thoughts don't make sense. Richard is having a flashback similar to the one Kaylin had earlier in the Wayward Pine, and Kaylin tells him not to think about the boundary, but to think about the trails and the woods instead. Kaylin then successfully applauds Chase's magic trick by quickly clapping his hand against her face 2 times. Kaylin yells at Chase and goes in for the hat trick of hand-to-face exchange, but Chase stops her from hitting him and asks if she wants to go on hitting him or get the answer to the question of why he felt this was necessary at all. Chase tells Kaylin that the path through the boundary is a very dangerous one, where one step to either side would result in passing through the boundary wall, being lost forever. Chase says he knows about the boundary because he spent his entire life near it, and while Kaylin and Zed have been through it, Richard has not. Kaylin isn't satisfied with his answer and tells him he should have warned Richard first. Chase says the magic trick isn't the kind of trick you can explain before it's done, and the only way to learn from it is to experience it firsthand. Chase says he's never had a child show the proper level of respect for fire until they put their hand in it. Kaylin degenerates to a position of nuh-uh, and Chase responds with yah-huh, and Richard says, "Cut it out, you two, don't make me turn these horses around." Then he changes the subject and asks Chase how he knows the boundary is failing. He tells Richard that before it wasn't possible to see through the green into the darkness beyond. Zed chimes in and says his wizard knowledge is telling him the same thing. Richard asks Zed if his wizard knowledge can tell him when the boundary will be down, and Zed says, "I don't know," but Richard isn't hearing any of that noise and tells them to make an educated guess. The best Zed can do in that situation is to say it will last 2 weeks minimum, but 6 or 7 and it'll be gone. Zed also says he isn't powerful enough to strengthen it. Richard shifts the conversation to whether or not Dark and Rawl knows about the pass. Chase says, "How should I know?" Zed says he wouldn't have a reason to know since he can travel the underworld. Richard says regardless of whether he knows about the pass, it's probably a bad idea to stick around now that he's been staring into the boundary because Dark and Rawl might know where they're going. Kaylin doesn't seem to understand and asks Richard what he means. Richard answers her question with a question of his own. He asks if she thought that was really her mother and sister she saw calling to her from inside the boundary. Kaylin says she thinks so, Richard says he doesn't think so, and Zed says he can't know what to think because no one really knows. Richard says that isn't true, and just because they don't know about it doesn't mean that Dark and Rawl doesn't. And he's right. That would be a mistake to assume that because they can't know, no one else can. Richard says that his father wouldn't want him to step through the boundary and die just to be with him. Richard says despite what his eyes tell him, he thinks that Dark and Rawl's disciples were trying to take him. Richard thinks that there were things waiting for them to go through the boundary with magic, and that Dark and Rawl will be getting word from those things soon enough and giving away their location. And whether he's right or not, he doesn't think it's a good idea to wait around and find out. Chase agrees, better safe than sorry, and says they need to make it to a nearby swamp to camp so they will be safe from the Heart Hounds, and tells them the next morning they'll go and see an old friend of his named Adie, who happens to be a bone woman, leaving me and all the other readers to ask if that means she dresses up as a skeleton for Halloween every year. While the group of adventurers is getting ready to leave, they're suddenly attacked by super fast, dark, tentacle-like appendages, making this chapter, more than any chapter in the series so far, the most vulnerable to fan-based creations centered around Rule 34. Chase is struck down with such violence that his body is flung across the air, landing among several nearby dead trees, and moments later, one of the tendrils wraps itself around Kaylin's legs and starts dragging her straight to the boundary. Richard dives forwards and grabs Kaylin's hands, but whatever is pulling her is strong enough to still drag both of them quickly towards the boundary wall. Excuse me. Zed tries to blast it with wizard's fire. I said excuse me. but gets struck by the same thing that Chase did, knocking him through the air. Richard can't find any purchase in the dead area because all of the wood is rotten and dead, and the ground is wet and slippery. Richard has Kaylin grab his waist so he can get his arms free, and once she does, he pulls the sword of truth free. But when he does, the thing wrapped around her legs wraps around them even tighter. Both of them go into the green light, and Richard determines that while Kaylin has her arms wrapped around his waist, he won't be able to reach the thing which is trying to drag her through the boundary. He tells her to let go of him, but she's holding on to him even tighter than Elmira Duff holds on to the cat which we shall hug and kiss and hold and love forever. Richard tells Kaylin everything will be fine if she just lets go of him, but he shares through his narration that he is telling her what she needs to hear, because if she doesn't let go, the chances of survival are 0. Kaylin holds on for a moment longer and finally listens to Richard. With Kaylin still being pulled, Richard is standing right at the boundary wall and comes face to face with the vision of his father, reaching out for him. He swings the sword of truth and it passes through the boundary wall, causing the image of his father to explode faster than a watermelon at a Gallagher performance. Luckily for Richard and Kaylin, the boundary wall also acts as a splash guard. Richard swings the sword again at the thing holding Kaylin while she screams for him to stop because she thinks it's her sister. Richard doesn't listen and stabs the thing through the boundary, exploding the thing holding Kaylin. For the moment, Richard and Kaylin are out of immediate danger. He scoops her up in his arms and heroically carries her to safety, still on high alert. With the battle over, Richard takes Kaylin and sets her down outside the boundary, only to have her put her arms around him so she can calm down. She's worried about Zed and Chase and immediately then tries to run off after them. Richard is still on high alert and he's hungry for a fight, to the point of almost running back towards the boundary himself to find other monsters to kill. Kaylin is worried about Zed and Chase, and she says that they have to go back and find them. Kaylin starts running back towards the boundary, but Richard grabs her and forcefully tells her to stay put. Richard finds Zed unconscious in a heap, and while he goes to carry him back, another one of those tendril things tries to get him, but it misses, allowing Richard to cut it in half with the sword of truth. Richard drops Zed off with Kaylin and goes to find Chase. He keeps the sword out and finds Chase wedged under a fallen tree. He's still barely able to control his angry rampage mode, but nothing attacks him. Richard is able to drag Chase back to Kaylin as well. Kaylin doesn't know what to do, and Richard takes the lead, putting his friends on horseback and using more of his Alm-based healing salve to stop the bleeding on Chase's head wound. Richard tries to lead them back to the trail, but without Chase to guide them, it's much more difficult than before. Finally, Richard finds some oak trees, and he travels along them until they start to become more frequent. Richard becomes angry with himself for getting lost because he's supposed to be immune to getting lost in the woods because he's a woods guide. Kaylin expresses her previously overt concern against showing any affection towards Richard by showing affection towards Richard when she puts her arms around him. She does let go of Richard before he can do anything about it, and she thanks him by telling him the boundary terrifies her. She tells Richard to save the I told you so's for someone else. Richard and Kaylin continue down the dark and winding path, not knowing where it will lead or how far they have left to go. Before they reach the place of safety Chase was talking about, they hear the Hearthounds start to come for them, and Mr. Goodkind leaves us with yet another cliffhanger, leaving us to wonder if they'll be safe from the Hearthounds coming after them.